Hey guys, so I'm just touching base with everyone out there. We had a couple questions that came in about Daniel 1. Just a few things we wanted to cover, try and get these questions answered, see if we can better fill in the gaps on what we're studying. And once again, I would definitely tell you to go ahead and read through the book of Daniel a couple times just to kind of get a lay of the land. But one question that kept coming up that a lot of people were asking about submitting to a corrupt government when Daniel submitted to the chief of the officials who himself was underneath the influence of King Nebuchadnezzar is, well, what about our own great history? What about our fight against British tyranny? What about these things that we had? You know, there was a time to fight and we have to fight. So is there ever a time that we have to stand up and fight against a system or a person that is constricting or restricting our ability to proclaim the gospel? So the quick answer is yes, there is a time to fight. But what I would preface that with is that it's not our first option. Daniel's first inclination is not to go, you don't understand, these are my rules, this is how I'm going to live. That wasn't his first inclination. His first inclination was to be respectful and to go through the proper channels. And in our own history, we see that as Americans. If we look at the time right before the Revolutionary War, we sent commission among commission to the British Parliament and to King George to air our grievances. And then, unfortunately, we erupted into the War of Independence, which, interestingly enough, for a couple years in Britain, it was known as a War of Treason. So just a little tidbit. But when we ask the question, well, we have to fight sometime. What if they're infringing upon our rights? We have to be very careful and very selective to designate what our rights are versus what our life is in God's hands. Our rights are important. God's plan for our life is more important. So is there going to be a time when we have to stand up and say, listen, this isn't right, I'm not standing for it, I'm going to fight against this very instance? Yes, we've seen it in the past. It might be something in the future. However, whenever we stand up, whenever we get belligerent, whenever we get angry, we have to make sure that we are doing it not for ourselves, but for the glory of God. It's very, very dangerous to live our life working for our goals, our rights, our possessions. We should, through prayer and study and reading of the Bible and fasting, be closer to God's heart, what God calls us to do. Because there will come a time when a government, an organization, a person, a group of people are going to say, you cannot preach the gospel any longer. And at that time, we're going to have to stand up and say, no, I'm going to fight you on this. But as we'll see later on in Daniel, not only did they do that, Daniel and his friends, but they also submitted to the consequence. So you always want to bear that in mind. So the other big group of questions we got was, why is Daniel making such a big deal out of food? I mean, this is the king's choice food. It's like being served passion fruit juice and a pound of bacon every morning. For most of us, we would be happy to have something like that. It wouldn't be healthy. I laugh because 2 or 3 years ago, my wife went out to visit my in-laws, her parents, with our kids, and I was home alone for a couple weeks. And she called me that night. She's like, hey, so what did you do for dinner? I was like, I made some bacon. She's like, okay, what else did you have? I had some bacon. I ate the whole pound of it. Not something I would recommend. But Daniel is making a big issue of this. We would think, like, this is great. We get free food, we get free drinks, we get everything. This is going to be a great time. But Daniel seems to understand, more so than sometimes we do, is that if God asks you to do a small thing, and God asks you to do a huge thing, in God's eyes, they're the same. They are a command by God that we should fulfill. A person who's given the heart and the command to go out and preach the gospel to the Juvots in Papua New Guinea versus a person who's called to come work with the homeless in Denver to the person who's been called to stay at home and take care of his kids. All of those things are commands by God. And Daniel knows that it is not a command. It's not the size of the command, it's who it came from. God said in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, do not eat these type of animals, specifically pork. And what we read in the historical context in Babylon is there were swine herders. And that's something that Daniel said, okay, God said not to eat this. End of conversation. I want to prove my love to God. I want to prove my devotion to God by saying, okay, I will not do this task as God has told me not to do it. Whatever that task might be. And as we see it progress in this book, we see the challenges get bigger and bigger and bigger from our perspective. It goes from, not eating meat or not defiling meat to being thrown into a fire furnace, bound down to an idol, praying to a statue. They get, in our eyes, bigger, but in God's sense, it's the same thing. God said, do not do this, and they keep those rules. That is really what it's about. It's not about just the food. It's about that God gave a command, and no matter what the command is, because of the source, we should keep it. God says love each other. We need to love each other. A lot of people like to debate, well, they hurt me, they wounded me. Christ says love them. I'm not saying hang around them, I'm saying love them. Another couple people picked up is I used the term brainwashing when I was talking about how they were developing Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. They said it's a little too far. It's a little overreaching. I'm going to go out on a limb and disagree with this. I think brainwashing is a pretty accurate term. And the reason is this, is Nebuchadnezzar took these youths out of their culture, out of their city, out of their country, out of their governance, out of their area of safety. So we already see trepidation and fear being used as a way to coerce involvement. Then we see that they're taught Babylonian literature and the Babylonian language for 3 years. Then we're seeing that they are given new names of Babylonian or Chaldean origin. All of this is so that their talents, because they are been proven to be smart and wise and intelligent, their talents will be used for the furtherment of the body that took them out of their country. So their talents are going to be used by someone other than their brothers and sisters, and it's going to be used by someone under force. I would say that that is not textbook, but that's pretty close to being brainwashed. You're going to serve me. You're going to do what I say. You're going to forget about who you were and who you grew up to be. You're going to learn about me and my law and my country, and you're going to serve me. And that was one thing that Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael were good at fighting against. They remembered who God was. Again, like I said on Wednesday, I believe it's because they had a good influence from their parents, not only in the temple life, but their parents as well. They probably saw their parents. Their parents talked to them about these rules, about these regulations. And that is something that I think is good to remember. These kids, 14, 15 years old, remembered who they were. And that is something that I hope that all of us can wish upon our kids. That whenever they go out into the world, they remember who they were with Christ. They remember who they were with God because they saw us acting. It would be a huge boon to my self-esteem to know that my daughter was able to stand against the frustrations and the snares of the devil because she remembers reading the Bible with me, that God's plan for her was executed through someone like me. I would love if that came to fruition. And then the last question that kind of got thrown around, and it was going back and forth between some people, is I had said that God's plan is going to be accomplished no matter what we do, but let's be part of it. And there's a valid question in that, and what they're asking is that if God's plan is going to be executed, why should we worry about it? Why should we do anything about it? Why should we waste our energy? If what's going to happen is going to happen, there's no point in doing anything. And I was reading actually in Romans this morning that there was something I want to read to you guys real quick, and I think it goes a long way to kind of letting us know or giving a little more light to what I said. And it's Romans 9, I think it's 26. Let me just make sure here. Oh, nope, see, that's why I'm glad. Is it's not 26. Oh, hold on, let me try and find this. Yes, and it says that salvation is not attained through desire or effort, but by the mercy of God. So we have to understand that it's not attained by desire or effort. Our desire and our effort are not going to complete God's task. It's not dependent upon us or our actions or our heart. God is going to accomplish what he has set for this world. What he's asking us to do is to have a desire for his plan, is to put in an effort in his plan, because that's what brings him joy and glory, is us saying, I will do whatever you ask of me so that your plan can be further succeeded, so that your plan can be furthered. But I'm not going to depend on my actions. I'm not going to depend on my desire to bring me closer to you. I am your son because you chose me. End of conversation. Your plan is going to happen because you've chosen to enact your plan. End of conversation. But you give me the option. That is what I was referring to when I was talking about God's plan is going to be accomplished. Let's go ahead and be on the further ride. Is God's plan will be accomplished. We see that in Revelation. Everything is going to happen as God ordains. But I really do want to be part of it. I want to be part of God's plan. I want to be part of God's design. So that's where I was going to leave it. Those are the 4 questions we got. One is there ever come a time when we have to rebel and fight? Yes, but depend upon God when that is. And don't fight for your own interest. Fight for God's glory. The big issue with food, we saw that. It's not necessarily a big issue about food. It's a big issue the fact that God issued a commandment, and David and Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael want to keep that commandment. I still hold by that the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, were trying to brainwash these kids. They were trying to make them forget their original culture and become totally incorporated without a thought of where they came from. And then when it comes to God's plan, yes, it is going to be executed and it is going to come to fruition, but he is going to give us the loving opportunity, part of that. I would like to be part of that. So once again, guys, if you have any other questions, if anything ever comes up that you want to talk about, you want to discuss even, we can definitely do that. This text line is always open. And just real quick, guys, if you need anything other than that, if you have questions about anything else, about prayer or anything you hear on the website or hear in the news right now, go ahead and give us a call. Give us a text. We can go ahead and get that done for you. Guys, as always, I hope you have a fabulous weekend and a good week. If you need anything, we'll be here. Enjoy and enjoy your family.